Welcome to the Colorado Independent's monthly event series. Tonight's event is on fracking and local control, a hot topic in the state, and it's probably not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I want to thank you all for coming and thank Josh Penry and Elise Jones for coming. Elise Jones is Boulder County Commissioner. She is a longtime advocate of environmental causes. She worked for the League of the National Wildlife Federation, the League of Conservation Voters, the Colorado Environmental Coalition. The list is long. The list is long. And this is Josh Penry, to our right, of course. He's a former state senator, Republican state senator, former minority leader. He was a candidate for governor in 2010, maybe the craziest race of any race in Colorado history. And now he's a vice president at EIS Solutions, an oil and gas consultancy. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
And thank you also to Denver Open Media, to the Open Media Foundation, to Channel 57, which is broadcasting this live. Thanks to KGNU. Let's begin.
Great.
A lot has happened about fracking on the topic in the last year. We had the war over ballot initiatives last summer. We had the task force, the governor's task force, that was started in order to calm down that ballot initiative war, expensive election war. The task force finished their work. New York State banned fracking. And now we have the bust. Gas prices have gone down. So a lot has happened on fracking, but maybe not so much. I'm just wondering, in your camps, the people you talk to, what has changed in your own perspective? What's changed over this last year and what hasn't?
Well, my camp is really the people of Colorado and the folks in particular who I represent in Boulder County. And for them, the folks on the ground who are living next to oil and gas facilities, not a lot's changed. They're still living with the impacts. The facilities are getting bigger. Instead of single wells, we now have 10 and 20 acre industrial fortresses that are showing up in their neighborhoods, and they still have very little control over that. They're still very, very concerned about the health effects of fracking for their kids, for their grandparents, and nothing has changed in the last year in terms of Colorado law that gives local communities like mine any more say over how this all happens inside our borders.
Josh, what do you say?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, thanks. At least good to be here. I think these conversations tend to stray to the conflicts and the controversies and ignore the tremendous upside opportunities associated with the hydraulic fracturing, the breakthrough innovations that it's triggered. The reality is there's a lot of controversy. I'll talk about that in a second. But there's also a remarkable bipartisan consensus among leaders in both political parties in support of hydraulic fracturing. I mean, in a day and time when the political parties agree on virtually nothing any longer, the most prominent leaders in both political parties support hydraulic fracturing. On the left, you have President Obama, who talked about the importance of hydraulic fracturing in his State of the Union address last year. Hillary Clinton is an unabashed and enthusiastic supporter of hydraulic fracturing. Last year, when Jared Polis put forward his initiatives, Governor Hickenlooper, Senator Udall, and the list goes on of Democrats came out opposed to it. And I think that's, and obviously Republicans support it in kind. So you do have this this coalescence of leadership at the state level and the federal level who say responsible hydraulic fracturing is not only safe and responsible, but it's also an incredible opportunity for our state and our country. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, it's opened up this huge resource. America is now the #1 oil and natural gas producer in the world, a big deal. If you would have told somebody 10 years ago that'd be the case, they'd have laughed at you. Economic opportunity. If you look at the impacts of what fracking has done to the availability of gas, which has brought down carbon emissions and the implications for climate change, there's a whole litany of reasons why there is support. And so that the conversation for many people starts there. Obviously, Colorado jobs are important too. I think for some, the reality is enough will never be enough. Colorado has the toughest, most onerous oil and gas regulations in the world. In the last 5 years, we've enhanced and strengthened, most recently to deal with methane emission issues, first of the kind in the country, and still you have individuals and organizations who want more because they don't want fracking. They want the New York solution, which is abandoned. And I just don't think that washes in a state grounded in pragmatism like Colorado.
Well, if I might respond, I don't think the question tonight is thumbs up or thumbs down on fracking. We can have that debate. But really, it's whether or not local communities should have a say over what happens inside their borders. We have zoning authorities that allow us to regulate every other land use in the book. Marijuana stores, porn shops, hazardous material facilities, cement plants, power plants, you name it, we wouldn't put those in residential neighborhoods. We have no say over where oil and gas fracking happens in our communities. And if oil and gas fracking is so great and is bringing so much money, why the hell can't we do it right? Why can't we, like I just cursed on, sorry.
It's okay.
Why can't,
it's cable and it's late.
Why can't communities, why can't cities and counties say, no, it doesn't work in residential neighborhoods? Even you must agree, there is a better place to put a heavy industrial facility than next to homes and schools. It doesn't make any sense. We can do a whole lot better. And yes, Colorado is a leader on certain things, like our methane rules, and we should be proud of that. Doesn't mean we've done good enough yet, and it also doesn't mean we're a leader on local control. The state of Texas does more. The city of Dallas has a 1,500-foot setback, which is 3 times ours. We don't allow that. State of Pennsylvania allows local communities to use their zoning authority. Why can't we do that in Colorado? Why are we trailing on allowing local communities a voice over what happens in their homes or in their backyards?
What about that, Josh? You mentioned that the politicians on both sides of the issue support hydraulic fracturing and support gas extraction and oil extraction. But how does that speak really to what Elise is talking about here, where local control, I think that's a bipartisan issue, and that's also not a political issue. It's on the ground, it's people in their neighborhoods. How do you respond to that? I'm wondering, from your perspective, is that a solution? Is what we're seeing on the political level and the economic level, is that a solution for these people in their neighborhoods?
Well, I think part of in the first place, the conversation is framed by Boulder and sort of Boulder-centric municipalities in Fort Collins, college towns essentially in Boulder, that passed fracking bans and extended moratoriums time after time. So if it's not a ban, pray tell why the bans, right? It's about a ban. And if you look at where the conversation ultimately ends and where it starts and begins, that's what they're after and won't be satisfied with anything less. The notion that local governments don't have the authority to play a substantial role in oil and gas regulation is just flatly wrong. There are meaningful protections under rules that were put in place 4 or 5 years ago that give local governments special standing in front of the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission to insist on terms and conditions for permits that deal with a whole litany of issues, including the issues you raised: setbacks, proximity, timing of when drilling has happened, deal with really like the legitimate, I think, conflicts of dust and traffic and all those types of things. They have real authority, and if they don't like the decision of the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, they have special standing to go and litigate and challenge and on and on. So, and that's why the interesting thing last year, a lot of the folks, there are a handful of local government officials who are saying they want local control. About 152 last year, county commissioners, city council members, current and former, said we have tons of authority and it's actually working very well. The example I liked, actually I was at one of these forums and something that another person pointed out to me, it's interesting that most of these fights are happening in communities where they're it's more academic, where the band fights have happened, the votes. It's in the city of Boulder, for example, where there's not really oil and gas activity. But in communities where actually oil and gas is happening, in the municipalities of Weld County or in Garfield County, these votes aren't happening because in reality, those local government officials understand they have the ability to influence outcomes through the existing legal authorities that the local governments have on top of what the state gives them, which are the toughest in the country. The last thing I would say is this is a one-way play, right? There's legislation moving through the legislature encouraging the federal government to give local control of federal lands to Mesa County and Garfield County and all those rabble-rousers over there, my former constituents who would want to drill on federal lands. And the environmental community screams that these are public lands. And local control is not appropriate and it's an overreach. And so the reality is both sides on many issues like to use local control to serve ulterior motives. In this case, the environmental community uses the frame of local control to push their broader objective, which is a Cuomo-style New York, Fort Collins, Boulder ban.
So I disagree with a lot of what you just said. You need to spend some time in Erie, in Windsor,
Loveland,
Greeley, Battlement Mesa. These are places where citizens are clamoring for more say over the egregious proposals that are being suggested right next to their homes, within 700 feet. Huge, huge projects, 28 wells, 50 tanks in Windsor. Those local governments don't have the authority to stop it. And as a county commissioner, I assure you, we don't have the local authority we want. And I'll be clear, because I think you're right about local control over federal public lands that belong to American taxpayers. No, that doesn't work. And I'm not suggesting that the state doesn't have a role. The state absolutely does have a role in oil and gas. The state needs to set a strong foundation of protections. Every kid in this state deserves to breathe clean air. I don't care if they're born in Greeley or Boulder. They deserve that. But local governments should be able to put additional protections on top of that to meet the needs of their communities. It happens in every other industry. Take development, for example. Can you imagine the outcry if we tried to legislate land use at the state level in Colorado? Wouldn't work, right? Because every community is different. Look at the difference between Weld County and Boulder County. We have different economic futures. Weld County is based on oil and gas. That's fine if that's what they want. Boulder County is based on quality of life, outdoor recreation, beautiful landscapes, air quality, water quality. So we don't have a right to make sure that any energy development that happens inside our borders makes sense with our economic future and doesn't run at cross purposes? That's what we're asking for, is the ability to protect our own future. We're asking for the ability not to be Weld County if we don't want to be Weld County, right? We don't want the state to tell us. We have to accept that level of intensity and density of wells and production facilities, and we do not have the power to stop it, because when we try, what happens? We get sued, right? There's only one community that is successfully using its zoning authority to regulate oil and gas, and that's the city of Longmont, which was sued by the state, by the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, and they dropped that lawsuit as a part of the political deal last fall. So Longmont can use its zoning authority and say, no, drilling doesn't work in residential neighborhoods. But the rest of us, we will be sued.
Well, I mean, we can go back and forth. There are municipalities, cities, and counties across the state that have a slew of arrangements, regulations, MOUs that impose terms and conditions on the operations of oil and gas activities. So, you know, the other issue, that, I mean, you have a private property right. This is what Governor Hickenlooper, I think, has been articulate about. You know, that slouch of a politician, he managed to survive a Republican tidal wave and win a pretty healthy re-election, and he's been pretty unabashed. And part of the issue is you have people who have a legitimate property right. And this isn't Venezuela. The government doesn't get to say, no, you don't get to access your property right. That's not how it works. And that's what these bans effectively would do. And it's not just sort of willy-nilly lawsuits that are being filed against these communities. They're winning in these courts. In a judiciary, let's be honest, is not exactly right of center judiciary in the state of Colorado with the history of Democratic governors. And the reason is there's a trade-off that's enshrined in our statute and our Constitution. First of all, you have property rights. You can't just take people's private property rights away. It's a staple of our democracy in our country. The second piece is there's a trade-off. We're going to have tough, robust, meaningful regulations, and we're going to apply them on a statewide basis. To the extent there needs to be conforming moves at the local level to augment and strengthen those, they have that authority, and they're happening every day through these MOU processes.
MOUs are only as good enough as the leverage you have to negotiate. And what you can get in an MOU now is what the oil and gas companies want to give you. They don't give you any more because you don't have the leverage to get any more. And that's why Erie, the first one to do an MOU, had to go back and say, you know what, this isn't good enough for my community. It's not working. And
they got a deal, though. Right, they got a deal, and Erie, you mentioned Erie, and you mentioned Windsor. Those are two communities that were presented with what you said. I mean, there are conflicts there clearly in the communities. And the communities I was talking about before are the communities that push the bans at the local level. There's conflicts there. Two communities that have said, you know, we're going to work this out. We're going to work with the industry, and we're going to get it right. This is not easy. This is not easy, but it's happening. I mean,
Josh, the way it works out is citizens have to scream bloody murder and say, property rights, what about my property rights? What about my quality of life? I sunk my life savings into this house, and now there's a drill rig next to it that's threatening the health of my child, that's keeping me up day and night with the noise of the drilling. What about my private property rights? And when they scream loud enough, sometimes the industry gives them a temporary reprieve and works to negotiate a new well site location. which is great. Is that the way the system should work? Why can't it? You have not made a case for what would happen, why the world would come to an end if cities and counties could use their zoning authority to regulate oil and gas like they do every other land use in their communities. What would happen? Do you think Weld County would stop drilling? I don't think so. I think the world would go on,
Let me tell
but
you
there
what I
would
think
be
would
a
happen.
lot fewer conflicts.
We better let John have his show back, but
Oh,
I'm happy
sorry.
to tell you
No,
what
please, go ahead. I'm
Well,
fascinated.
I'll tell you what would happen if you gave the authority. I mean, they've kind of made no secret about it. A lot of environmental groups, the well-funded, Tom Steyer's coming to town here in the next couple of weeks. They want bans. Like, this is not, we're not making this up. These elections are literally happening all across the state of Colorado. The state of New York, if the ban is not the objective, why are the same people that are here and funding all the fights here, there, insisting on Governor Cuomo supporting a ban? Why are they beating the crud out of Hillary Clinton for supporting fracking? I mean, these people, they want, it's what they pushed in Europe. It's what they're pushing across, what they want a ban. So I think it would be important, just like, let's acknowledge it. Let's have an honest debate. The environmental community wants a ban. They want to ignore the fact that fracking has created energy independence. They want to ignore the fact that fracking has brought cheap natural gas that's actually bringing down carbon emissions, which is helping deal with the climate change issues that environmental communities, purport to care about so much. And so the reality is that's what they've done because that's what they want. And if you give the authority, and this is not me, this is what John Hickenlooper said, we are not going to give local governments the authority to veto responsible use of their activities. And I think this industry is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of the actors are good faith and they will work with friends and neighbors because they live in these communities as well.
So you're saying you don't trust cities and counties to use their zoning authority to regulate oil and gas?
If we magically passed a law that gave you what you want, what would happen is energy chaos. This is what about 150 local government officials, Republicans and Democrats, said. You would have oil and gas ban fights all over the country. And think about this: if you run an oil and gas company, a small one or a big one, do you want to spend a dime investing in a state when you're one city council election or one local ban fight away from having your investment wiped away, a la what happens in some of these tin hat dictatorships in other parts of the world? And that's fundamentally the issue, and that's what they have.
But let me first clear up a couple of things. There's often discussion about local control that we have right now, the zoning control. Some people say we've got plenty of zoning control, it's working in some places, and other people say this zoning control is a straw man. It doesn't actually work. We can't do much. As a county commissioner, what can you do? Tell the public, what can you actually do? How do you mitigate these problems? How can you address it?
So I just want to be clear. Zoning, where I can say as a local elected official, this compatible use should happen in this zone, this incompatible use shouldn't happen. The idea of keeping, again, porn shops and power plants out of residential neighborhoods, we do not have the authority to implement that for oil and gas without getting sued. Again, only jurisdiction that's doing that is Longmont, and they got their lawsuit dropped by the state and COGA through their political deal. The rest of us are not free to do that. What we can do, sure, we can do permitting authority, we can try to push for extra protections.
Setbacks, like Broomfield. I mean, they're getting them.
When you say permitting authority, what do you mean?
Well, you can require that the oil and gas company come through your local permitting process, and you can hold a hearing. I mean, there's processes you can. But in terms of citing and deciding where and if oil and gas drilling occurs, local governments have very little control. And I don't want to denigrate local land use authority because we have a lot. It just happens to be on this particular point. We don't have very much. And we are tired of being sued. We are tired of having to waste tax dollars fighting the industry every time we work to protect our citizens and make sure that they're adequately protected. And so that's where we're falling short. Again, all we're asking is the same authority that we have for every other land use in our communities. Right?
Yeah.
So every other industry, the water industry, mining industry, gravel industry, marijuana industry, developers across the state comply with local regulations and state regulations. The world has not come to an end. There are not moratoriums on development in communities. It's that it looks different in each community. And we can argue about whether or not fracking should happen and whether or not the desired future is a fossil-free future that is not dependent on greenhouse gas emitting fuel sources. And you're right, a lot of people want that because they're worried about climate change and what's going to happen to their kids as our planet warms, and I would consider myself one of them. But in the interim, we're talking about whether or not local communities should have a say that allows them the ability to protect their citizens for this land use like other land uses.
Josh, you talked about these activist organizations, environmentalists want to ban fracking, that it's really all about banning, whether it's local bans or state bans. But a lot of people on the ground will say that we're not necessarily for the bans, but we want control to say we don't want our real estate to be cut in half. It's the one investment we have in our lives. We don't want people drilling in our alleys. That if there were more local control, the bans would be less attractive and any outside group coming in wouldn't gain traction. I mean, these 4 or 5 bans, these local bans in the Front Range, they felt really grassroots to the people living there. Maybe you have a different opinion, but
Probably.
but you know, these a little change in local control, the MOUs, the memorandums of understanding, might make a huge difference on the ground.
And if it were so, I would have beachfront property in Phoenix to sell you. During the negotiations with Jared Polis, everybody around the table, he's hitting the table. Jared Polis, this guy who's got his hundreds of millions of dollars. Life's good for Jared Polis. Life is good for Jared Polis, and he's going to be coming on his white horse. And so he threatens these ballot initiatives, and it was a fracking ban, and then it was setbacks, and they tried to get their act together. But it forced this negotiation, and at critical points in the negotiation, people sort of made that point, made that offer. Okay, we want to increase our authority. Great, let's increase your authority, but let's draw a line. Let's say no bans. A ban on bans, just flat out. We give you muscular, increased, expanded authority to do all the terms and conditions. No way. Deal breaker. Why? Because of what happened in New York, because of what's happening in Europe, because of what happens in Fort Collins and the city of Boulder and the county of Boulder. At the end of the day, these activist groups want bans. And here's the other reality. They're starting to lose. You mentioned, if you look at Longmont, Longmont passed, and Longmont's a tough place for one of those fights, but it passed 60 to 40, the ban did. In 2012. In Broomfield, it was a ban passed, but it was essentially a statistical tie, again in a tough community. Loveland happened last year, and there was a pretty decisive defeat for the folks who were advocating for a frack ban in a community where oil and gas actually is happening. And I think that's part of the reason Polis withdrew. I think that's why the environmental community is hunkering now. It's not quite the slam dunk because the arguments are slightly more complicated than we can't do anything.
Josh, nobody was saying that a fracking ban would win in court. The problem is Colorado state law. Right? Gives state way too much power over what happens in local communities. I want to ask you, how close do you want this to your house? Your 2 kids. This is what blew up a week ago in Greeley. The wastewater.
How close was it to a house? Probably not very, is the reality. Because,
well, thank goodness. Yeah. Because this is up here. This is an exploding waste tank that is flying off the property. Now, the point is, this could be sited pretty close to your house, within 500 feet.
And I would say, probably not. And local governments have the authority to ensure that doesn't happen through the LGD process, to insist on terms and conditions.
Wait, what's the LGD
The local
process?
government, when Governor Ritter passed his regulations, which Elise supported, and many of us had heartache with because they went so far, they created a special process for local governments to inject themselves into the statewide permitting process and say, we want this, we want this, we want this. If those commissioners ignore that local government designee, which I'm waiting for an example where they usually don't. They give them what they want from setbacks to, sort of the whole litany of things. They have that local government designee has authority to appeal those decisions, special standing, essentially, authorities. And so the idea that local governments are powerless to do that is just, it's not true. And that's why many of these issues are working themselves out.
I'm a local elected official. That's not true. Local government designees are not Superman. The COGC does not listen to them and grant their every wish. We do not have the ability to waive state setbacks. We would like to. We would like to see this thousands and thousands of feet from a home because we don't think that makes sense in a residential neighborhood. We would like the ability to make sure that doesn't happen. And the beauty of the technology now is you can drill 2 to 3 miles underground. You have a lot more flexibility over where you locate the site, the surface impacts associated with drilling. So why do we have to fight so hard to get these things away from homes? It would be better if the industry, it would be better for their PR. This can't be good for anybody, right? We wouldn't have these fights if we could make better sense of where this stuff is located and how well we're protected from
So
it.
the state of New York was a total aberration, where there was no production happening and they wanted to ban.
Well, New York's a different place.
Please,
than
they have a
Colorado.
different state law.
But it's not. But it's the same. But it's the same activists.
Okay,
I'm happy.
but
I'm happy.
Josh,
I'm happy to go. I'm happy.
But
I'm
New
happy.
York is a very different place. I think we all can say that.
So you're telling me, but you ran.
I'm
But
saying-
here's my problem, Elise. If you hadn't run on a campaign platform of no drilling, no fracking, no spills, one of three, I'm for. But that's the reality is that is this entire culture. They try to block oil and gas development near homes. This is the argument we're hearing today. They try to block it on the Rhone Plateau, hundreds of miles from anywhere near the homes. They try to block it out on the the Gulf Shore, out on the Gulf, near Florida, near Louisiana, North Dakota, tied up Wyoming. So when you add it up in accumulation, these are all these groups, and what they want is what Elise said. And I actually admire Elise. I heard her speak at a forum, and what they want is a wholesale rapid transition away from fossil fuels, which is Pollyannish, unrealistic, but at least Elise has the sort of the whatever the term is to articulate that. And that's what they're after. And I think it would be better if they would just stipulate to the fact they want the bans. That there's a reason that those additional authorities weren't invested, because they wouldn't
But
draw a
Josh,
line on bans.
it doesn't matter if people want bans. Yes, they do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do oil and gas development better in Colorado. It doesn't mean we shouldn't give local communities more say to at least keep this away from homes. That is a minimum that we could do. We are not doing a good job now.
Except that was. Whenever I have these debates, it reminds me of arguing with sort of the anti-vax crowd. There's formaldehyde in vaccines. Do you want formaldehyde injected into your body? Scare tactics are scare tactics, and they only go so far. But the reality is that's not near a home. Colorado has the toughest oil and gas regulations in the world, and clearly that's not enough for everyone.
Okay,
but
Josh,
it's a lot.
What we're talking about here is local control.
Yeah.
And there is discontent on the ground, and it's just you've mentioned the environmentalists, people coming from out of town, people working in New York and all around in California, but there is discontent on the ground, and I wonder if you would address that. How would you, the oil company doesn't like this any more than anyone else.
Right.
How do you solve that problem? How do you actually address these things? These are real dangers. And people only own their home. It's their only investment for many, many people. So they're really concerned.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the property value argument is an interesting one, because if you look at property values in Weld County, why don't you flip through the assessors? I mean, property values are doing very well in Weld County because the rising tide lifts all boats, right? There's significant economic activity in that community, and they're doing well. I represented this is not foreign to me. Usually I debate people who are from somewhere near. I get this. I've actually talked to people, and I get it. Like, this is complicated. It is complicated. I totally concede that there's traffic, there's dust, there's noise, the timing, the location. These are legitimate issues that have to be worked through. I've been on Battlement Mesa before and had these situations as a legislator dealing with constituents. The reality, though, is the industry does have an incentive to work in narrow cases relative to specific homeowners or neighborhoods, because they don't want to fight. They don't want litigation. They don't want protracted processes that cost lots of money. They want to be good neighbors. Most of the time, they live in these communities. And that's why you've seen this industry every single year for almost 10 years give additional protections, additional concessions. And it actually has fissured the industry itself. There's lots of argument. When is enough enough? And so I think any person, I mean, there was an interesting article in Foreign Policy magazine where they were presenting the pros and cons of fracking. One person, a military person, made my arguments I made at the outset. EDF, the president of EDF, talked about some of the issues, the problems you're articulating. But who did he cite as the exemplar of doing it right? Us here in Colorado. We have the most robust protections in the country, and it is working. It's not perfect because of the nature of the split estate scenario. But to go too far would be to go too far.
But Josh, we're dealing with the richest industry in the world, and they're drilling at least until recently, unprecedented rates, a level of intensity and density we have never experienced before. And to say that, gee, are we asking too much? The more they drill, the better they need to be at it, the farther they need to be from people, the safer it needs to be. We're not getting that. So yeah.
But your footprint is because of fracking and horizontal drilling. Your footprint is. I mean, you know all
All right,
this.
so Josh,
it's all
I'm a local
right.
elected official,
Yeah.
right? We share a boundary with Weld County. I can drive 600 feet, walk, bike, 600 feet over the boundary, and did not so long ago. And I can stand there in a neighborhood and turn and see 7 of these 5 to 10 acre facilities surrounding these homes. It is getting bigger and more intense. The footprint is not getting smaller. It's getting more consolidated, and there's certainly some benefits from that. But the impacts associated with the intensity of drilling that's happening is unprecedented, and it's happening closer to populations of people than has ever happened before. So we do need to do it better. And to maybe move to something potentially, possibly, maybe more optimistic, and I'm going out on a limb one of the things the task force did do was say, let's do a rulemaking on the siting of these multi-well facilities. And that's going to be starting up sometime this fall. If that could be meaningful, that could be a step in the right direction. It won't be enough, but it would be helpful in order to get the biggest, most intense facilities farther away from homes. So
Agreed. I agree. I mean, there are these where the conversation evades the abstract and the academic and the political and gets down to the practical. Should we put it here or there? The industry does have, for a slew of reasons, have an interest in working that out. Doesn't always, but they do have a decided interest. They do have a decided interest, and so that's why you saw the task force. The industry supported these things. You got the toughest rules in America that have been layered on additional layers the last 10 years, every year, and you're going to have more. And the industry supports them as evidence that they're good neighbors in this.
Unfortunately, industry voted in block against every task force recommendation that would have provided more local control. So I don't look at the task force process as being successful in its mission. That was unfortunate. But I'm hoping that maybe something can come out of that rulemaking, because our constituents just plain deserve better, and these facilities are huge. And to think that I, as a local elected official, don't have any say over where a 20-acre well facility is going, it just boggles my mind.
Well, I want to talk about that, the expectations in a democracy. I think the task force reinforced this idea that oil and gas has captured the political system. People feel like I can't stop drilling in my backyard. Who's in charge? Who do I talk to? And the task force was kind of like a symbol of how it works. It was majority industry people. They had basically veto power. And they see that same thing happening in the legislature. You said politicians on both sides are for hydraulic fracturing. They're sympathetic to it. They know it's an engine of an economic engine. I'm just wondering, this feeds again into these local movements. You know, the oil and gas industry gives millions of dollars to candidates in the state. How do you see that working out? What can the industry do to stop up that perception?
Well, that perception doesn't come from like poof from a black box. I mean, there's obviously another side that last election, I think, spent more than a couple of dollars, maybe $100 million. I don't know what the number, but it was a large sum of money. So like the whole pauper routine and like just regular citizens is a bit of a stretch, because there's significant resources on both sides. This is a big fight. This is a very high stakes fight. I think what you saw from the task force is you go at it, you get together, it's democracy is here, you have different people with different perspectives, and you make incremental progress. And the progress is that we already, what everybody learns is when you start this process is we can't just let this run amok, and then you show up and you sit down and you see these reams of rules and regulations, and you find out we have the toughest regulations in the country. And then you get back to the same points. There are always modifications and evolutions to the rules that as technology and practices change, where you have to be agile to do it. And the industry has like consistently supported those changes, including here, where they won't go there because they're not fools. If you give, and this is Governor Hickenlooper's position as well. I mean, there's a lot of people that take this viewpoint on both sides of the aisle, and elected and not elected, that if you give local veto, the other side has a very clear agenda. It's not a secret what their agenda is, and you're going to have this mishmash of attempts for bans, which is going to chase capital and investment and jobs and economic opportunity and revenues. And so, and to the point it occurs to me on Weld County is, why is Boulder agitating for bans and moratoriums? Weld County has a local government. They've learned to deal with it and live together. Production has been happening there for a long time. There's a reason it's happening in Boulder, because Boulder's politics are Boulder's politics, and Weld County's learned to live peaceably with the oil and gas industry.
I'm sorry, Weld County is not living peacefully with this. The constituents in Weld County, I hear from them all the time, and they call me up and say, can't you do something to stop this? To which I say, your county commissioners are these people, you need to call them, because no, I can't. But we have up and down
I get the same calls
county
about
line.
you, by the way. I'm just kidding.
Best of luck on that. But because truthfully, we're starting to weigh in on what's happening in Weld County because it impacts Boulder County. Those trucks are going down our roads, right? The emissions are blowing over. So the oil and gas industry, unfortunately, the history, and I didn't bring the flyer from the 2008 rulemaking, which industry doesn't like me to show, but where I think it was something to the effect the sky is falling, the oil and gas industry is going to leave the state because these rules are being implemented. Now industry champions those rules as the toughest in the country. That's why you don't need to regulate us anymore. And of course they didn't leave because the mineral resources are where they are.
You know how many rigs are operating on the western slope where those rules were the toughest?
Well, but it's a whole different environment.
Well, it's
urban.
Of course
urban
it
and
is.
suburban.
Yeah,
here.
And Josh, the only rules that are now the best in the country are our methane rules. We are behind the 8 ball when it comes to local control.
The president of EDF, Environmental Defense Fund,
The state of
disagrees
Texas
with you.
gives
Disagrees
its
with you.
communities more local control than Colorado does, and that's a pretty pro-drilling state. So what are we scared of?
So you want
is
Texas regulate oil and gas
why
regulation
is the
in
city
Colorado?
of Dallas allowed to have bigger setbacks than Greeley? Why is that?
This conversation is not going to get any
We're going to arm
less
wrestle.
tense, less tense. So I'm wondering, just watching you two, it's like a grain of sand. The Oil and Gas Task Force, if it did nothing else, people aired their thoughts, their feelings. You got on the record, you got people in the gas patch saying what they were upset about. You got oil and gas industry people saying what they were upset about. We have an election year coming up. We'll probably have more ballot initiatives. It's a presidential election year. It will be very intense. Are we circling the wagons? Is there some place to compromise? Has the MOU, the memorandums of understanding, are those a silver bullet or not at all? Or does that just create another patchwork that the industry can't work with?
Asked like 6 questions.
Are we circling the wagons? Is there some place we can go? Or is it going to be an intense election year where this is the main topic?
Well, regardless of fracking, it's going to be an intense election year. We're going to be electing a new president. Let's be clear about that. I do think that if we don't do more on this issue, if we don't resolve it, if we don't answer citizen concerns, yeah, we're probably going to see something on the ballot. And I'm not against ballot initiatives, but often it's not the best way to legislate sophisticated policy that should be done in a rulemaking. But I think the citizens are fed up. I think this issue is not being resolved. I don't think the current climate in the state legislature is going to allow it to be resolved. So I do think elections matter. I think that this issue is not going away. It doesn't mean that we can't make progress between then and now in trying to make things better on the ground. But we, right now, are not headed towards a grand solution on this. And no, MOUs are not a silver bullet. It's like trying to negotiate where one side has all the power and one side has very little. That's not going to come out to be a great agreement. It just isn't. Until you level the playing field, you're not going to get an MOU that's going to satisfy a local government that wants to be doing more than the state to protect their residents.
I think what the posture that the industry is taking is you almost have to compartmentalize this. And Lisa and I have known each other a long time, actually like each other. The reality is on that the first 40 minutes of this conversation, you're not going to agree, right? And it probably will at some point this year in the future go to a ballot fight or have be a continuing conversation. What the industry has to do in the meantime, you have to compartmentalize the conversations, try to work in good faith with communities to find real solutions on the ground, you know, where to place things, where to time things, how to deal with the legitimate issues that exist. I often, Elise is tough. I think the toughest oil and gas, or county commissioner for the oil and gas industry to deal with is a lady named Barbara Kirkmeyer, because she walks into these meetings, she doesn't want to ban oil and gas, but you know what she does want? She wants her roads fixed. She wants that berm in place to make sure that it's not visible from from a state highway or from across a road or near a school. She insists. She drives a hard bargain, user authorities to do it. She's a tough cookie, and I think that ultimately is where we have to.
Has she ever said no to an oil and gas permit in Will County?
And have you ever said yes? You know, the reality is we're never gonna. I think the way it plays out over time is at some point you will reach an equilibrium. The environmental community is chomping for this fight, and until Loveland, and until they lost in Loveland last year, I think you probably would have had it last year. So I think they'll at some point, if they think they can pass something, they'll push it. And it's too bad because I think it's a waste of resource, and we have the toughest rules in America, and we got to improve them while we can.
I think I'd like to ask some questions from the audience here. Yes, go ahead. Can you walk to the mic? Thanks.
How would you feel about compliance?
Hold on just 1 second.
Are we ready?
Go ahead.
Mr. Penry, how would we feel about, what if the oil and gas industry would comply with the toughest rules in America, being the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, CERCLA, RCRA, NEPA, and the Community Right to Know laws, to which they've obtained exemptions from key provisions? Would you back the BREATHE Act and the FRACT Act that would revoke these exemptions to the federal laws that we depend on for our health and safety? Those are the toughest laws in our country, and your industry does not need to follow them. Would you like to change that?
Well, that was thanks for the question. That's a full plate. On the Clean Air Act, I would say Colorado is compliant with President Obama's tough new air quality rules that are raising havoc across the Midwest and are a source of considerable political contention for him. How are they doing it? Because we have a wealth of natural gas that burns cleaner than other sources of energy, and by the way, it's less expensive too. And so, the idea that this industry is not regulated, it's the most regulated industry on the planet, at all levels. So it does speak to the fact that you can't just totally ignore the significant environmental benefits associated with all the natural gas that's cheap and available and making our skies cleaner for it.
But since you brought that up, Josh, natural gas burns half as dirty as coal. That's better than coal. But where we fall flat is it's still a fossil fuel, and that only pens out if you deal with the methane issue. Now, we are starting to try to do that in Colorado. Unless that's done everywhere else, it's not clear what the climate benefits of natural gas are. And I would note on the air quality front, we have more to do. I sit on the Regional Air Quality Council. The oil and gas sector is the largest and only growing source of volatile organic compounds in the metropolitan area. We are out of attainment with ozone. EPA just announced a couple of months ago that they're going to strengthen the ozone standard, which they need to do because ozone's a huge public health problem. We have to do more, because if you're going to drill that much, you got to clean it up, because right now people are getting sick because of the dirty air, and the problem's not going to wait. It's going to be a huge problem that the metro area is going to have to deal with.
And you'll see the industry has and will continue to work with.
So, but you can't complain about being overregulated.
I'm not. I'm just saying they are. I'm not. The question was why don't they?
And they need to be. And they need to be even stronger.
Hi, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going? Just a question to you. You were mentioning that a lot of these local communities are very much in favor of having fracking wells in them. And if that is true, why would a stronger regulation affect the oil and gas industry? If the local community is united behind a vote or behind a popular opinion that this well is promising and will provide a stable economy and future jobs, why would a little more regulation matter? Why would allowing for zoning laws matter? Because if the way I look at it, local elections are very much driven by the people who work there, by the proletariat class.
Well, I mean, to go back to the first part of the exchange we had, it's just not true to say that local governments have no authority in this process. 150 county commissioners, city councilmen, mayor, current, former, but they have the authority. I guess what I'm saying, to put it in academic terms, is I'm not stipulating to your premise. The reality is they do have authority. So through these MOU processes, Elise says they have no authority. The reality is they consistently extract safeguards, protections, requirements, terms, conditions that actually are probably contrary to state law because they exceed state law, because the industry wants to be a good neighbor and they don't want the fight. They don't want the litigation. They want to be a good neighbor. So through that MOU process, memorandum of understanding, through their local government designee, which has special legal authorities under Colorado state statute, they are getting exactly what you're after.
So Josh, I didn't say we didn't have any authority. I said we didn't have enough, and we particularly don't on the siting and location of oil and gas facilities. What you're saying is we have as much authority as the oil and gas industry wants to give us. And I'm sorry, that's not enough. And the gentleman's question, I think, was on point, which is if we were to say to Weld County, if we said, Barbara Kirkmeyer, you have the authority to use your zoning powers in Weld County to affect and influence the location of oil and gas, what would change in Weld County? I bet you nothing, right? And that's where a majority of drilling happens in this state. So I think the gentleman's question was, what are you scared of? If the city of Boulder, if Boulder County, if Lafayette, if Erie, if we had more control over oil and gas, you'd have less controversy. But those aren't the drilling hotspots. So what about it? What about giving local communities more control, the same land use that they have over?
I mean, we could repeat the last half of the show if you'd like.
At least stipulates the point.
Yes, right, she does. Right.
Anyway.
Next, thanks.
Josh and Elise, great debate so far. Really great discussion. I've enjoyed it a lot. Elise, I have a question for you. You talk a lot about being able to permit, porn shops and other items in Boulder County, which is great. We also talk about oil and gas or minerals being where they are. How do you see protecting those private property rights and those who own minerals? You can't pick those up and move them like you can a pot shop or another industrial facility and move them to other parts of Boulder County. How do you see to protect your constituents who own those private property rights, their ability to utilize them and access them from doing so? Because it sounds like you're wanting to restrict them. So I'd be curious to hear how you want to protect those and protect your constituents from being able to access that and not impeding their constitutional rights.
Good question. There's a couple of different things that go into that answer. One is, as I mentioned earlier, with directional drilling, we have the ability, industry has the ability to drill horizontally 2 to 3 miles now. And that distance keeps growing. And that gives you a lot of flexibility over where you site the surface impacts. So a lot of the discussions in Windsor and Erie are about locate this stuff as far away as possible from homes. Industry's not doing that now, but they could. Another is, I don't think that anybody's guaranteed 100% recovery of all mineral resources. Is 90% enough? I think those are some questions. If you get most of it, that's what's happening in the city of Longmont, is they're using zoning to protect residential areas, but only about 3% of the resources aren't recoverable from other industrial zones in the city. So is 3% a huge takings? Well, the mineral operator in Longmont was okay with it, so I guess not. So there's ways to deal with merging local control and allowing some level of oil and gas development that doesn't trigger takings. If there's one thing that local governments know, it's how to deal with takings. We deal with land use takings issues all the time, and we know that our land use authority has to stop before a taking starts.
So if there was a negotiation, you would take a ban off the table, take new muscular authorities and just call it game, and everybody can move on. You're willing to accept something that doesn't allow local government to ban oil and gas development or ban hydraulic fracturing?
I'm willing to accept it. Are you suggesting you were going to change state law?
Well,
Do we have something here that we can talk
well,
about?
I think I know the answer. I think I know the answer is why I asked the question.
Yes, another one.
Josh, good to see you
Yes,
again.
sir. You too.
You were a little cavalier about the New York ban. Let me tell you something about how it was derived. The health professionals in New York looked at all the fracking studies that had been peer-reviewed. that was 400 when they did it. They looked at them all. 96% of those studies indicated that fracking held the potential to harm public health. Now, I've debated you, and you've said the verdict is in, fracking is safe. But when you have 400 studies, peer-reviewed by scientists, it's not a political gambit. Have you changed your position? Do you not think that 496% probably has some weight in this world, and that we ought to consider the health of the people before we consider property rights and other, I consider, extraneous issues?
Well, the answer is no. You can layer on. You throw your studies. I'll throw my studies. I'll ask you a question in return. Was Barack Obama's head of the Environmental Protection Agency? Did she commit perjury when she testified before the United States Congress that groundwater has never been contaminated, not a single time, by hydraulic fracturing? I could throw studies at you from a litany of colleges and universities that contradict what you said. But here's the more practical explanation. 60 years hydraulic fracturing has been happening all across this country. 60 years, and the technology has improved. It's gotten safer. It's actually gotten more economic and better. And so that practical experience also undermines a lot of this. I mean, I think you hear a lot of skies falling. Governor Cuomo was fundamentally conflicted on this, right? He would danced back and forth for months, years, actually.
Conflicted on the issue or on the politics?
Well, I don't know. He and I don't have dinner, but he danced forever, right? And he was subject to a massive, impressive public relations campaign, and he ultimately caved. And he didn't do it himself. It was environmental officials that did it so that he could have daylight. I mean, the reality is this is a very political process stipulated on both sides. You can have your studies. There are plenty of other studies and 60 years of experience that say hydraulic fracturing is safe.
But Josh, we don't have 60 years of experience with the level of drilling that is going on now. The shale oil and gas boom is about 5, 6, 7 years old. We have never drilled at this intensity, this level, because we have not married horizontal drilling and fracking together except for that short amount of time. So the cumulative impacts, we haven't studied them. The public health studies that would say, yes, it's okay to have a home within 500 feet of a 12-acre well facility, multi-well facility. We don't have those studies. Those studies haven't been done. We're waiting for them. So what we have is a whole lot of concerns about public health that really haven't been answered. And it's very legit for people to say, we should move with caution as a result.
Hi, my name's Kim Munson, and I wear a variety of hats, but I'm on the Douglas County Energy Coalition. And there's an excellent book that has recently been written called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein. And what he talks about is the quality of life, the length of life of people goes astronomically higher, and I think it's not a partisan graph that you're looking at. I think it's like UN or something like that. And it made me think. I'm originally from Western Kansas, and I have a picture of my grandmother. And she's standing out in front of a 2-room sod house that she lived in with her 5 brothers and sisters and her parents. So a sod house is basically a mud hut with no water. And they had to go out on the prairie and get dung to burn. And it's because of fossil fuels. And it has to be responsible and efficient and affordable. But it's because of those fossil fuels that her granddaughter can drive down here, that I can talk to friends on the phone, I can check news. And it's because of fossil fuels that have done that. And I think that we need to be honest about what the end game here is. What I hear is the underlying is a ban. And if we ban fossil fuels, we are going to progress back to something that others in the world want. If you look at once China and India start to use fossil fuels, the quality of life goes up. People are demanding that. And so I guess, Elise, my concern is that we say we want a better life for people, but the thing that's given people a better life seems to be something you might want to ban.
Elise.
Well, I do believe, because of our changing climate, that we need to transition over time to clean, renewable sources of fuel. And I believe technology will evolve to allow us to do that. But I agree with the premise that energy has helped improve the quality of life. The question is whether or not we can continue to evolve and have a cleaner source of of energy that doesn't also heat our planet up to the point that it's not habitable by our species. Setting that aside, I think the premise of tonight's conversation is, can we do a better job than we are with oil and gas development in Colorado? And I say emphatically, yes, we can do a lot better. So regardless of whether or not you want fossil fuels to continue ad infinitum, we should be able to do a better job at protecting our citizens and assuring that we're not putting them in harm's way by not having this industrial process happen in their backyards. That's not too much to ask. We can get better. As I said, the more that industry wants to drill, then the better they should get at it. And we can make some improvements here.
Josh, parting shot?
Yeah, well, thanks for the debate. It was lively. And I think it's not unique here to Colorado. There was a fascinating story in Mother Jones last year that really,
You don't read Mother Jones.
Of course I do.
She's a relative.
She knows, right? But it articulates why Hillary Clinton's robust support of hydraulic fracturing. These arguments are happening all over the world, across Europe, Romania, Bulgaria. And the story articulates she went into these countries, everybody was demanding a ban, met with their leaders and articulated the case, and essentially convinced them not to pass bans. But the end of this paragraph is interesting because it sums up the case, the robust, the meaningful, sort of the game-changing effects of this hydraulic fracturing revolution. These episodes shed light on a crucial but little-known dimension of Clinton's diplomatic legacy. Under her leadership, the State Department worked closely with energy companies to spread fracking around the globe, part of a broader push to fight global climate change, boost global energy supply, and undercut the power of adversaries such as Russia that use energy resources as a cudgel. The reality is there are going to be conflicts. As with any industrial activity, Colorado has the toughest oil and gas regulations in America and indeed in the world. But there are meaningful and really game-changing benefits associated with this. From an economic perspective, we haven't even talked about the huge break the middle class is getting because of cheap gasoline right now, thanks to hydraulic fracturing. And those are all those have to be taken in consideration and balance as we try to do the right thing for our state.
Josh,
right,
how close do you want this to your home? That's the question.
And do you like Saudi oil?
I think his prop actually trumps yours. We have Josh Penry reading Mother Jones. I think it's a full success. And thank you
You might
all
have
for
a point.
coming very much. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for having
Elise.
us. It's good to see you again.
It will be a long year. It'll be a long year till next November, and it'll be heated, and I look forward to every minute of it. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Read us at the Colorado Independent, www.colorado.